You thought you'd feel light, liberated, maybe even invincible. But instead, after the breakthrough came, packed silence. Not the peaceful kind, the kind that echoes, the kind that feels like standing in an empty room where the walls have been stripped bare and you no longer recognize the sound of your own voice. This is the paradox of awakening. Everyone talks about the moment of clarity, the sudden expansion, the shedding of illusion. But what they don't prepare you for is what comes after. That hollow space, that strange absence, that quiet ache you can't quite name. And it makes you wonder, did I do it wrong? Why does this feel like loss instead of liberation? Why do I feel so empty? But it's not regression, it's not failure, it's not spiritual error. It's part of the process. Because when the illusion dies, it doesn't go quietly. It takes with it everything you used to lean on, identities, roles, projections, attachments. And what's left is space, a sacred, terrifying space. Carl Jung said it clearly. Enlightenment is not imagining figures of light, but making the darkness conscious. And when that darkness rises, it's not always dramatic or cinematic. Sometimes it's quiet. Sometimes it just feels like nothing. Not because nothing is happening, but because everything is being restructured inside of you. The emptiness you feel isn't a void. It's a womb. But most people don't see it that way. They mistake the silence for stagnation. They run back to noise, to validation, to something, anything that feels familiar. Because stillness can be more confronting than chaos. But the emptiness after awakening, it's not your undoing. It's your initiation. And before you rebuild, before anything new can bloom, you have to stand still in that raw, open space and realize the light you were chasing was always meant to be found in the dark. No one tells you that enlightenment begins with destruction. Not the dramatic kind, but the subtle erosion of everything you once called you. Your identity, once so defined, so clear, starts to dissolve like mist in the morning sun. And at first, you think something's gone wrong. But it hasn't. You're just witnessing the collapse of the old self. What you're feeling is not emptiness. It's ego death. And it's one of the most sacred, disorienting things a human can go through. Carl Jung spoke of this often, the painful dismantling of the persona, the unraveling of the false self we built to survive. Because before you become whole, you must first let go of who you pretended to be. And it doesn't feel like a grand revelation. It feels like confusion. Like walking through your life with a ghost version of yourself, unsure of how to speak, how to relate, how to care about the things you used to crave. You start to wonder, if I'm not my career, my relationships, my roles, my past, then what am I? And that's the question the ego can't survive. Because the ego is structure, the ego is story. And when that story ends, the silence left behind feels unbearable. Like you're floating, like you're falling, like you're nothing. But you're not nothing. You're the clearing. You're the space in which something true can finally emerge. Ego death is not a spiritual glitch. It's the beginning of authenticity. But it hurts. It hurts because we mourn the mask we wore. Even if it was heavy, it was familiar. Even if it caged us, it gave us identity. And now, with the cage door open, you find yourself standing in the wild, uncertain, unshaped, unarmed. That's what makes this stage so sacred. Not the clarity, but the courage it takes to stay in the collapse, long enough for something real to rise from it. Most people fear the void. They think it means something's broken, something's wrong, something's missing. But what if the void is not the enemy? What if it's the invitation? What if the emptiness you feel is not a signal to go backward, but a doorway into something bigger than you've ever known? We've been conditioned to equate fullness with success, full schedules, full relationships, full identities. But the truth is, most of that fullness was noise. Distraction dressed up as meaning. When enlightenment comes, real enlightenment, not the romanticized version, it doesn't fill you. It strips you, and what's left is silence. Stillness. Void. But the void is not absence, it's potential. It is what remains after illusion has burned away. In Buddhist philosophy, shunyata, emptiness, is not seen as lack, but as openness, the fertile space where attachment dissolves and pure awareness arises. Jung knew this too. He saw that the void wasn't death. It was the compost, the space where the psyche could reconfigure itself, not into perfection, but into wholeness. But here's the part most people avoid. You can't rush it. You can't force clarity into the void. You have to let the stillness work on you. You have to be reshaped by the silence. And yes, it feels disorienting, like walking through fog with no map. But that's the cost of real transformation. You don't get to know what's next. You only get to be available to it. This space, this emptiness, is not punishment. It's sacred ground. It's where identities shed, where illusions dissolve, where truth begins to whisper in a voice so quiet, you'd miss it if you were still distracted by the old noise. So no, the void isn't the enemy. The void is the temple. And only those willing to sit in it, without trying to escape, will ever truly meet themselves. Once the ego falls quiet, something else begins to speak. At first, it's subtle. A tension, a discomfort, a heaviness that seems to rise from nowhere. But if you stay present, if you don't run back to distractions, you begin to see it for what it is. Your shadow is waking up. Because when the ego dissolves, when the armor falls off, what's been hidden in the dark finally finds space to emerge. The emptiness you feel isn't just loss, it's exposure. And what rises through that exposure isn't always pretty. It's the anger you suppressed to stay lovable, the grief you buried to stay strong, the shame you inherited without ever questioning it. These aren't flaws. They're fragments, pieces of you that got exiled when you were taught to be acceptable instead of authentic. Carl Jung said, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." This is that moment. The moment when the unconscious becomes seen, not in ideas, but in sensations, memories, impulses you don't yet understand. And it can be terrifying, because now you're face to face with the parts of yourself you spent a lifetime running from, and there's nowhere left to hide. But hear this, your shadow isn't there to destroy you, it's there to complete you. It holds your suppressed strength, your unseen worth, your forgotten joy. You don't integrate the shadow by fighting it. You do it by witnessing, by listening, by holding space without judgment until the darkness loses its sharp edges and becomes familiar. This stage is messy, uncomfortable, but it's also sacred, because only when the darkness is brought into the light can healing begin. This isn't the part of the journey they write about in self-help books. There's no neat checklist, no guaranteed peace. But there is truth, and that truth, raw, real, untamed, is the beginning of your wholeness. After the awakening, after the collapse, after the void and the rising shadow, something strange happens. You go quiet, not by choice, but by instinct. Your soul pulls back, like the tide retreating before a wave, and on the surface, it feels like apathy, like disconnection, like numbness. You might wonder if you're slipping, losing momentum, falling asleep again. But you're not. You're recalibrating, because the psyche, after it touches something that real, something that deep needs space to digest it, profound insight rearranges your entire internal architecture. And like bones after a fracture, it needs time to set. This isn't regression, it's recovery. The withdrawal isn't a failure of growth. It's the pause that preserves it. Carl Jung often pointed to the rhythms of the unconscious. Like nature, the psyche moves in cycles: expansion, contraction, stillness, integration. And in this phase, you're not meant to chase. You're meant to listen, to slow down, to allow the silence to stitch you back together. But silence doesn't feel productive. Not in a world that rewards urgency, speed, clarity. So you might start blaming yourself. Why don't I care? Why does everything feel so far away? Why can't I feel the light I once touched? Because you're not meant to. Not yet. This is not a mistake. This is the in-between. The deep inhale before your next exhale. The cocoon before the flight. You're not disconnected. You're descending into a deeper alignment. And sometimes that descent feels like emptiness. But in truth, it's a sacred solitude, a retreat of the soul into its inner sanctum, where it prepares not just to return, but to return transformed. And then one day, it hits you. The things you once lived for, the praise, the likes, the job title, the relationship that looked good in photos, they no longer move you. You look at the life you built and feel a quiet hollowness where once there was hunger. And it's not depression. It's not indifference. It's clarity. Something has shifted. Because once you've glimpsed the truth of who you are beyond roles, beyond image, beyond expectation, you can't go back to pretending. This is the disorientation of becoming. You no longer fit in your old life. But the new one hasn't fully formed yet. You're caught between two worlds, the persona you constructed and the self that's still taking shape. Carl Jung spoke often about this moment, when the persona begins to fade and the self starts to emerge, and suddenly the external motivations that once drove you feel artificial, like wearing clothes that no longer fit your body. You smile at parties, but your soul feels quiet. You hit goals you used to crave and wonder why they taste like ash, because those goals were built from the outside in. And now, your life is asking to be rebuilt from the inside out. This stage can feel like failure, but it's actually the beginning of alignment. You're no longer chasing what validates the mask. You're learning to listen to what nourishes the soul. It's lonely, yes. Isolating, even. Because so much of society is still addicted to the external. Status, aesthetics, approval. But you're starting to see through it. Not with judgment, but with a kind of sacred indifference. Because now, what you crave isn't applause. It's authenticity. Not to be seen, but to be real. And that shift, subtle as it may seem, changes everything. Freedom sounds beautiful until it arrives. And when it does, it doesn't come like a sunrise. It comes like gravity. Because when the ego dissolves, when the distractions fall away, you are left with something far heavier than illusion. Choice. Real freedom isn't about escaping. It's about facing your life, your past, your mortality, and the fact that, from this point forward, nothing and no one else can live for you. There's no longer a script to follow, no voice louder than your own. And that silence, that sudden autonomy, can feel less like liberation, and more like being dropped into an ocean with no land in sight. It's not that you're lost. It's that you're now fully responsible for every decision, every direction, every truth you choose to live or deny. Jung understood this weight. He saw that individuation, the process of becoming whole, demands a terrifying kind of ownership. You're no longer buffered by fantasy or conformity. You can't blame the world, your parents, the system, because now it's just you and your soul's compass. And the further you walk this path, the more you realize this kind of freedom is not light. It's dense. It holds the mass of your unlived life, the shadow of your unrealized potential, the echo of all the yeses you never gave yourself. And before it liberates you, it will crush you. With clarity, with truth, with the unbearable responsibility of finally being awake. This is why many turn back. Because waking up isn't just a release. It's a reckoning. But if you can stand in that weight, not fight it, not run from it, you'll find that beneath it is the ground of your own becoming. And that ground? It's real. For the first time, it's real. They sold us a story. That awakening would feel like lightness, like constant peace, like floating above the world, finally untouched by pain. But real awakening, it's not bliss. It's sobriety. It's seeing things as they are, raw, unfiltered, unromantic. And often, that clarity doesn't lift you up. It levels you, because what you awaken to is not just light, it's the truth. And truth, at first, can feel like loss. The loss of illusions, the loss of roles, the loss of comfort you didn't know was keeping you small. Carl Jung never promised transcendence. He promised integration. And that process is slow, gritty, relentlessly honest. Individuation, the becoming of your true self, doesn't come wrapped in incense and affirmations. It comes through emotional excavation, through sitting in silence with the parts of you that don't want to be seen. And that silence, that emptiness you now feel, it's not failure. It's the real world seen without filters. No narrative, no chase, no projection, just the starkness of what's real. And for a while that can feel like nothing. Like life has lost its flavor, like you've gone numb. But you haven't. You're just no longer intoxicated. The ego loved drama. It loved the highs, the chase, the storylines. But what lives beneath all that is quiet, subtle, present. You don't feel bliss because you're no longer escaping. And this stage, this emptiness, is the beginning of trust. Not in the universe, not in some grand reward, but in you, your capacity to stay, to see, to feel, even when nothing glitters. Because real awakening doesn't make you float. It makes you land. And once you're grounded, you begin to realize peace isn't what you feel, it's what you become. No one talks about the morning, the quiet, creeping grief that follows a spiritual awakening. Because yes, something opened. Yes, illusions fell. But what came after wasn't just clarity, it was loss. Loss of who you thought you were. Loss of the future you once fought for. Loss of the comfort that came from believing things would always get better if only you tried hard enough, smiled wide enough, loved big enough. But awakening doesn't always bring comfort. It brings truth. And truth is cold at first. It shows you what you clung to that was never real. The dreams that were built on someone else's blueprint. The identity that was nothing more than survival in disguise. The love that wasn't love, just longing dressed up as destiny. And now that it's all clear, you find yourself in mourning. But it's not dramatic. It's quiet. It lives in your breath, your routines, the strange ache when nothing excites you anymore. You don't miss the past, not really. You miss the version of you that believed in it. That innocent, hopeful self. The one who hadn't yet seen behind the curtain. The one who still thought awakening meant arrival, not unraveling. Carl Jung understood this. He knew that growth meant facing not just the light, but the cost of leaving the false behind. And so, here you are grieving, not loudly, but deeply. This grief is sacred. It means you're no longer lying to yourself. It means you're no longer running. It means the soul has finally taken the wheel, even if the road ahead is still unmarked. You're not broken. You're bereaved. And until you honor what's been lost, you won't be ready to receive what's coming. Let yourself grieve. Let yourself remember. Let yourself release. Because the truth has set you free. But first, it made you say goodbye. Something inside you has died. You know it. You can feel the silence where something used to pulse. The hunger is gone. The chase has stopped. The mask no longer fits. But just because something old has ended, doesn't mean something new has begun. You're in the in-between now. The liminal space. The womb between death and rebirth. It's not emptiness. It's potential but unformed, unshaped, untouched. This space is sacred. It's disorienting because it's pure. No script, no role, no clear direction. Carl Jung called this the transcendent function, the moment when two opposing forces inside you hold each other in tension, and something new, something not yet imagined, begins to emerge. But emergence doesn't happen on command. It happens in stillness, in trust, in the space between stories. And that's the hardest part. Not being lost, but being in transition. You've let go of the old self, but the new one hasn't introduced herself yet. And so you wait. You breathe. You endure the silence without filling it. And yes, it will feel like nothing is happening. You'll wonder if you should go back. You'll long for the distractions you already outgrew. You'll ache to feel something again, anything. But rebirth doesn't rush. It arrives quietly, like spring inside your bones. This is not the time for certainty. It's the time for surrender. Let the darkness do what it came to do. Let the silence become your teacher. Because what's forming beneath the surface isn't just a new belief. It's a new being. You are becoming, not in fragments, but in fullness. And when you finally rise again, it won't be a return. It will be something the old you couldn't have imagined, even if she tried. You thought the hard part was the awakening, the unraveling, the descent into truth. But awakening is just the beginning. What comes next is the part no one glamorizes: integration. Because having the insight isn't the same as living it. And the real transformation begins when you stop chasing new revelations and start embodying what you already know. You don't need another epiphany. You need to become what the last one revealed. And that's where the emptiness comes in. Not as punishment, but as space. Space to digest. Space to ground. Space to build something real. Carl Jung understood that individuation wasn't a flash of clarity. It was the daily discipline of aligning your outer life with your inner knowing. And that's the harder path. Because it's not euphoric. It's not addictive. It doesn't give you that spiritual high. It's subtle, uneventful, sacred in its quiet repetition. It's choosing truth when no one's watching. It's honoring boundaries, telling the truth, walking away, staying present, even when it would be easier to forget. You may feel tempted to seek again, to go looking for the next awakening, the next teacher, the next aha moment. But you don't need more inspiration. You need integration. Because wisdom that isn't lived is just decoration. And enlightenment that isn't embodied becomes escapism. The real work isn't in what you realize. It's in who you become because of it. So if you feel empty right now, not lost, just still, take it as a sign. It means you're not meant to ascend. You're meant to root. The light you're looking for is no longer above you. It's within you, waiting to be lived. No one prepares you for the loneliness. You expect awakening to connect you to spirit, to others, to life itself. And in some ways, it does. But in the beginning, it separates you. You start to see things others don't. You feel things others avoid. You crave depth in a world obsessed with surface. And slowly, the spaces you once fit into begin to feel tight. Conversations lose their flavor. Crowds feel more isolating than solitude ever did. And so, you retreat. Not out of arrogance, not out of bitterness, but because your soul is calling you inward. This loneliness is not exile. It's initiation. Carl Jung called it inner aloneness, a necessary phase in becoming whole. Because to truly meet yourself, you must step away from the noise. You must leave the places where your mask was celebrated and enter the silence where your soul can finally speak. This isn't easy. Your nervous system will crave distraction. Your old self will beg to belong again. You'll question if you've made a mistake. You'll wonder why no one else seems to feel it this deeply. But here's the truth. This kind of solitude isn't absence. It's presence unshared, undiluted, unapologetic. In the quiet, you begin to hear yourself again. Not the voice shaped by others' expectations, but the voice that's always been waiting beneath. You learn to hold your own hand, to witness your thoughts without judgment, to sit in the ache without needing it to end. And somewhere in that stillness, something shifts. You begin to realize this isn't loneliness. It's sovereignty. You're not alone because no one wants you. You're alone because you finally want yourself. And that, perhaps, is the most sacred union of all. You don't notice it at first. It's subtle, quiet, like grass growing through the cracks of a life that once felt barren. But slowly, almost imperceptibly, something begins to return, not the old urgency, not the false joy, something deeper. Meaning, not the kind handed to you, not the stories you inherited, repeated, or performed, but the kind you build with your own breath. After emptiness, after silence, after all the crutches have been burned, you begin to live not for applause, but for alignment. You stop asking, what do they expect from me? And begin asking, what is true for me now? This is the soul's re-entry, but it doesn't come back as a seeker. It comes back as a sovereign, no longer chasing worth, but embodying it. No longer needing to belong, because now you belong to yourself. You begin to see clearly, success isn't status. Love isn't performance. Peace isn't avoidance. These aren't new beliefs. They're recovered truths, the ones buried under a life built for someone else. Carl Jung believed that individuation was the emergence of the true self, from beneath the rubble of the false one. And this is that emergence. Not dramatic, not loud, but steady. Now, when you wake up, you no longer ask what the world wants from you. You ask, what is mine to give? This is what meaning feels like after the death of illusion. Not a chase, but a homecoming. And in that home, there's no need to prove anything. You've already earned your place. By daring to return whole, you thought enlightenment would give you all the answers. It doesn't. It gives you something harder. It gives you peace with not knowing. Because the deeper you go, the more you see. Truth isn't a fixed destination. It's a living presence. And the more you try to hold it, define it, explain it, the more it slips through your fingers. Enlightenment doesn't shrink the mystery. It expands it. It deepens your reverence. It teaches you to bow, not to dogma, but to the unfolding. Carl Jung said, the most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely. And when you do truly do, you realize that the parts you tried to fix, improve, or escape were never broken. They were just misunderstood. And that changes everything. You no longer demand clarity from life. You learn to dance with the unknown, to meet each moment not with control, but with curiosity. This is what the emptiness becomes. Not a burden, but a companion, a sacred space where the soul can breathe, a silence that no longer demands to be filled. You no longer panic in the pauses. You rest in them. You trust them, because now you understand. Mystery isn't the absence of truth. It's the womb of it. You're not here to solve life. You're here to live it, honestly, fully, without needing to always understand it. And in that surrender, something ancient awakens. Not certainty, but wisdom. Not control, but communion. And maybe that's the point of it all. Not to master the mystery, but to let it remake you into someone who can carry it with grace. You are not broken. You are becoming. If the path has felt heavy, if the silence has been deafening, if you've looked around and seen only distance between who you were and who you're meant to be, that doesn't mean you've lost your way. It means you're walking it. This emptiness you feel is not the end. It's the womb of something entirely new. A new way of being, of seeing, of breathing in the world without needing to grip it. You've shed illusions. You've survived the collapse. You've stared into the void and stayed. And that is the most sacred thing a soul can do. Carl Jung didn't teach us how to escape the dark. He taught us how to walk through it, with our eyes open, with our hearts cracked but intact. You are not empty because you've failed. You are empty because you're making space. Space for truth. Space for alignment. Space for the self to rise from beneath the rubble of everything you no longer need. Transformation doesn't come dressed in light. It comes quietly, through grief and stillness. It moves like earth, not lightning. And here's what most forget. You don't have to feel whole to be healing. You don't have to feel light to be in the process of becoming it. Your confusion is part of it. Your fatigue is part of it. Even your numbness is a threshold, the final quiet before your soul steps forward, in full voice. So if you're here still, silent, uncertain, trust that you're not behind. You're exactly where you need to be. You don't need to be fixed. You need to be witnessed by your own eyes with gentleness. Because this isn't the end of the story. This is the soil. This is the seed. And you, beloved, are not broken. You are becoming something only the dark could teach you how to be. This story was intense, but this story on the right-hand side is even more insane.